Well, good morning from Washington, D.C. My name is Satu LeMay, and I'm the Vice President of the East-West Center. I'm delighted to welcome you, whether you're joining us this afternoon, this evening, or even perhaps the next day in the region, for this seminar, Connecting West and East, Indian Ocean Security, and the US Indo-Pacific Strategy. This particular seminar and the various analyses that frame the seminar derive from a project led by our adjunct fellow at the East-West Center, Ms. Nilanthi Samarnayake. We're very grateful to Nilanthi, not only for being an adjunct fellow here at the East-West Center, but gathering such an esteemed group of experts from several countries across the Indian Ocean region, as well as conceiving and really framing this very important topic at this critical juncture. As some of you will know, our Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy National Security Advisor from the United States were recently in India for the inaugural Indian Ocean Dialogue and had those discussions. But there are many other events across the region that are making the Indian Ocean once again an area of great interest as we frame a new administration in Washington and think about what the Indian Ocean's role is on its own, but also in the context of the US Indo-Pacific Strategy. And so thank you to our wonderful contributors, in addition to Nilanthi, for joining us for this program. The program is very simple. I'm going to turn this over now in a minute to Nilanthi to set up the overview and to make some comments based on her chapeau article or analysis for this series of papers. And then, of course, we will turn to the individual experts, which range all the way from the western part of the Indian Ocean, Madagascar and Seychelles, to the central region covering Maldives, India, and Sri Lanka, and of course, representatives from Indonesia and Thailand in the east. So Nilanthi, thank you again and welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Satu. Good afternoon and evening to everyone, especially our esteemed speakers who are dialing in from the region, for some in the very late hours. Last month, the East-West Center in Washington published a special Asia Pacific Bulletin series that I had the honor to guest edit, and we sought to understand various countries' views about Indian Ocean security and the US Indo-Pacific Strategy. Often here in Washington, South Asia is the region that tends to be associated with the Indian Ocean in US strategy and policy documents. But we call this series Connecting West and East to include the western and eastern sides of the Indian Ocean waters as well. African and Southeast Asian nations like Madagascar and Seychelles and Indonesia and Thailand. We try to seek out expert views of scholars from these countries, as well as Maldives, India, and Sri Lanka in South Asia. We wanted to know how they see the Indian Ocean interests of the 8 countries and also how they see the US Indo-Pacific Strategy as we come to the end of its 3rd year. To start us off, my piece examined US interests in the Indian Ocean. We don't see explicit strategic guidance on the Indian Ocean in high-level public US strategy documents beyond passing references. So I argue that we must therefore infer US security objectives in the Indian Ocean. I see 3 priorities based on previous trends and the evolving situation. First, ensuring the free flow of commerce and peaceful norms more broadly. Second, maintaining US military access, such as through basing facilities across the region. And third, preventing the Indian Ocean from becoming a priority, given increasing requirements in the other oceans, especially the Western Pacific, as well as the Arctic and Atlantic theaters. My article also pulls together a series of data points where Washington is increasingly recognizing the importance of the Western Indian Ocean, which suggests it may be starting to conceive of the Indian Ocean as a discrete region on its own terms in US policy. Thank you, and my thanks to all the authors for contributing insightful articles to this series.
Well, thank you very much, Nilanthi, for getting us started by framing some of the key issues. We now turn to, in order, the panelists for this program. Now you have the full bios of our esteemed colleagues in the materials sent out for the invitation. If I read them, we would take up half the seminar, given their backgrounds and expertise. But let me first begin by introducing Ryan Adeline, Research Fellow, University of Seychelles, to begin. Ryan, over to you. Ryan, I think you're still on mute. There we go. Thank you. Well, if you don't mind, Ryan, it seems that we're having a little technical trouble. So perhaps may I move then to Dr. Chulanee Attanayake, a sessional lecturer, Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, to begin, and we'll come back to you, Ryan, in a couple of moments. Hopefully we'll get the technical issue worked out. Ms. Dr. Attanayake, may I invite you, please, to make some remarks?
Thank you, Sathu, Nilanthi, and the East West Center for the opportunity to be a part of this interesting essay series and the webinar. So, as the title says in my paper, my focus is on Sri Lanka, its strategic location in the Indian Ocean region, and therefore its strategic role and the implications within the context of US Indo-Pacific Strategy. So my paper examines basically about Sri Lanka's geopolitical significance, maritime security challenges, and the role of US Indo-Pacific strategy for enhancing Sri Lanka's maritime security. So to begin with, I cannot reiterate enough how Sri Lanka's location is vital because of its closeness to sea lanes and choke points connecting the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and because of that makes it a crucial for global trade and geopolitics. So in my paper, I highlight there are number of maritime security challenges for Sri Lanka, but I highlight a couple of it in my paper about transnational crimes such as drug smuggling, arms trafficking, human trafficking, and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and environmental issues like pollution and climate change. So firstly, on transnational crimes, it is a pressing maritime concern for Sri Lanka because of Sri Lanka's proximity to drug-producing regions known as Golden Triangle. In the region, Sri Lanka has turned into a transit hub for illicit activities, including drug smuggling, human trafficking, and illegal migration. These activities not only threaten national security, but also strain Sri Lanka's resources and law enforcement capabilities. Separately, coming to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or what is known as IUU fishing, it continues to harm Sri Lanka's maritime biodiversity and local livelihoods. Despite regulatory frameworks on this, in particular, there are destructive practices such as bottom trawling by foreign vessels, particularly from India in the northern part of Sri Lanka's ocean, and that devastate ecosystems and disrupt communities in the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka. I also highlight geopolitical rivalry and the competition between China, India, and the United States in the Indo-Pacific as a concern for Sri Lanka, because geopolitical tensions and naval competition in the Indo-Pacific complicate Sri Lanka's security dynamics. As China, India, and the United States assert their influence in the region, Sri Lanka faces a growing pressure to balance these powers while safeguarding its sovereignty and strategic autonomy, which is a major challenge because Sri Lanka is a small country. Adding to these challenges are obviously environmental threats, rising sea levels, pollution, inadequate disaster preparedness, as we saw in a couple of years back because of a case called because of oil spill by a vessel. They underscore the urgent need for climate resilience and sustainable maritime policies. So in my paper, I outlined the strategy as a Indo-Pacific strategy as a framework for enhancing Sri Lanka's maritime security through capacity building, intelligence sharing, disaster preparedness, and through combating illicit maritime activities. I explore how this partnership balances geopolitical influence while preserving Sri Lanka's strategic autonomy. The US Indo-Pacific strategy in particular offers opportunity to address some of these challenges through capacity building initiatives like joint exercises and intelligence sharing. The US can support Sri Lanka in enhancing its maritime domain awareness and disaster response capabilities. And this collaboration not only will improve Sri Lanka's ability to counter these threats, but also strengthen its position in navigating regional geopolitics. So my paper evaluates the potential advantages of partnership between Sri Lanka and United States, including improved security and economic development, alongside the challenges posed by Sri Lanka's non-aligned foreign policy and domestic concerns over external involvement. However, I highlight that the path forward requires careful balance. While US-Sri Lanka cooperation under the Indo-Pacific strategy holds great promise, Sri Lanka must continue to uphold non-aligned foreign policy and ensure a partnership to serve its long-term interest without compromising strategic autonomy. So, in conclusion, my paper reiterates Sri Lanka's role in the Indian Ocean as pivotal, and I believe that by addressing maritime security challenges, leveraging strategic partnership, and enhancing climate resilience, Sri Lanka can contribute significantly to regional stability while safeguarding its sovereignty and resources. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Attanayake. That was superb, and I will come back to you, I hope, with some questions. I'll just note a couple that came up to me. You spoke about the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US and how partnership could build capacity and resources, but love to hear more about your view specifically of such platforms or mechanisms such as the Quad, which is highlighted in the IPS, and other tools that you think would build out Sri Lanka's partnerships. I see that Professor Adeline has not been able to join yet, perhaps for technical reasons. So I do want to push ahead, and then we can come back to Dr. Adeline when we have the opportunity. But may I now please turn to Dr. Pooja Bhatt, Associate Professor at the Jindal Global University, for her comments. Thank you, Pooja, for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Limay and Nilanthi, for having me for this discussion, and especially thank you for curating this, series where the voices from the Indian Ocean has been, used to work together in India-US relationship. So my paper basically follows up with what Dr. Chulanee actually mentioned just now, that my work basically figures out that Indian Ocean is actually marked by a different set of challenges from what we see in Indo-Pacific. While Indo-Pacific has a more US-China rivalry, which plays into the existence, the Indian Ocean particularly has different set of challenges because most of the countries are developing and underdeveloped countries. So their set of challenges come from the economic, security, and developmental issues, human-centric issues, basically. And therefore, India's vision for Sagar, the security and growth for the region in the Indian Ocean region, has been more human-centric in its approach. And In a way, it also complements the US Indo-Pacific Strategy of 2022, which also focuses more on building regional partnerships through, wide-ranging human-centric activity, where building resilience to, transnational threats have been focused as in the strategy. So I would want to follow from this background to further say that security concerns actually in the Indian Ocean are very basic, emerging from maritime domains such as terrorism, piracy, IUU fishing, and some of these has been already mentioned by Dr. Chulanee, so I would not further get into it. At the same time, we are all focusing on maritime trade, maritime connectivity, blue economy, the capacity building. So I think the issues of security concerns and the developmental issues of Indian Ocean countries in particular are very common, and it has been echoed by all the countries. And it is in this background, I provide 3 ideas for US-India collaboration, particularly in the Indian Ocean region. Firstly, I argue that it is very necessary to forge a common maritime identity for the region because of the common interest and common threats that the IOR countries face. Because IOR also is widely divided. It's divided into South Asia, Southeast Asia, West Asia, and Eastern and Southern Africa. When we talk about South Asia, we have a diverse set of cultures, and they all come joined together by a certain vision for the region because of the historical values and historical linkages and common values. And in this regard, I think US might be very helpful through certain platforms where we share certain rules-based ideas, orders, respect for sovereignty, peaceful resolution of disputes, and certain values which we share with the US. So I think US in the foremost can help these countries to develop these conversations that when the values are same and threats are same, how do we start building from the groundwork to build a maritime-based regional identity. And I think that should be the starting point for working together Indian Ocean between the Indian Ocean countries and the US. My second idea would be to partner the vision of the regional countries with the resources and expertise that the US and its like-minded partners might have to bring. Because as much as these countries are aspirational and in terms of challenging these maritime issues and threats, we might not be capable of challenging them on our own because of economic issues and other developmental issues. And therefore, it is very necessary that countries who have those wherewithals to come together with the resources and expertise they have developed over the years and time to partner with the vision of the regional countries in terms of capacity building, capability enhancement, and fixing where we lack resources, technology, and expertise. And there are certain fora ongoing where we are partnering with the US. And I think instead of reinventing the wheel with the US, we should use those ongoing platforms like Quad you mentioned, to further look into this matter to avoid the wastage of resources and duplicity of efforts. And third major point that I wanted to make is that again, US has to complement the regional efforts. Instead of a top-down approach, it has to be a bottoms approach. And in this regard, I think the Quad recent announcement and Wellington document that talks about human-centric development and global goods, I think is a very good idea because it focuses on very much on a regional level efforts in terms of building maritime security, safety, bringing about HADR, connectivity, strategic technologies, supply chain resilience. So there are a huge range of issues where the local efforts are going on, regional efforts are going on, and US can complement through those, its efforts. In this regard, I also flag one of the institutions being BIMSTEC, which is very important in regional efforts, where US can also, contribute in various ways. And BIMSTEC is doing a lot of efforts at the regional level to address the regional concerns. And that is where US can be a partner too. So I just wanted to bring about that there are a lot between India and US in terms of common interest in the Indian Ocean. And I think with these complementarities, we should work from the bottoms up approach rather than a top down approach to find more acceptance at the regional level and also bring more partners for collaboration. Thank you. I think I'll end with that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Pooja. And I hope we can come back to you and drill down a little bit more on how you think we could build that bottom-up approach. I have one question for the whole panel, which I'll come back to, and hopefully we'll get your views too as this program proceeds on what you took away from the recent first inaugural Indian Ocean dialogue between the United States and India, and whether you felt that that was a useful start to framing some of your ideas and implementing them and moving them forward. But we'll return. I do see now that our colleague, Ryan, is back on, or was just momentarily here, and I hope he's back. No, he's not back on. He was on for a moment, and I fear that we have lost him again. So Ryan, if you're hearing this, we look forward to your return. But in the meantime, please forgive us. We'll move ahead. There is Ryan now. So let's see if we can get him online. Connecting to audio. Okay, wonderful. Thanks for everyone's patience and flexibility in the program here. Adapting to real-time events, as in the Indian Ocean. Okay. Let's see. Ryan, are you able to hear me? Yeah, I think he still has tech issues. So let's move forward. And we will now turn to Dr. Kasira Cheepensook, Associate Professor at Chulalongkorn University. And Kasira, welcome. And thank you so much for joining this project and publishing an article and joining us today.
Thank you very much, Satu, and thank you, Nilanti, of course, Zoe, for organizing this, for including me in the series, and for the chance to be on the panel full of distinguished scholars working on security in the Indo-Pacific. I totally agree with what Dr. Chulanee and Dr. Pooja had said, that we actually face the common threats coming from maritime domain. A lot of the issues were indeed common threats. So in these brief remarks, I addressed some of the issues that Thailand's of interest lately regarding its security concerns in the Indian Ocean. So Thailand actually has broad conceptualization of maritime security and threats based on the most recent National Maritime Security Plan. New agency has also arrived on the scene, namely the Thai Maritime Enforcement Command Center, or ThaiMEC, which is quite interesting since the majority of its head personnel were from the Navy, but it is supposed to be a civilian agency working in collaboration with other relevant maritime security agencies, including, for example, the Ministry for Social Development and Human Security, for victim rehabilitation from human trafficking, for example, the Marine Police, the Excise Department, and Immigration, to name just a few. So this signified that maritime security for Thailand actually demanded comprehensive and integrative management. So priority-wise, I would say Thailand's commitments aligned well with the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Regional Indo-Pacific Vision, as well as the US Indo-Pacific Strategy. As you can already see from what I wrote, there are three areas I chose as significant. Some might even prove to be challenging for Thailand and the US in pursuing the shared goals also expressed in the Thailand-US Strategic Alliance and Partnership. Firstly, how the US Indo-Pacific Strategy re-emphasized strengthening democracy. Thailand, as Burma's neighboring country, was expected to contribute to the peace process, actually in Burma, both as bilateral efforts and in a regional context. It proved to be quite slow and difficult, though it did. I mean, Thailand did propose to use ASEAN in the form of Troika or Troika Plus, and then refer to the 5-point consensus plan. But as you can see, the progress was quite slow. Given that Thailand was affected by both displaced persons fleeing over and civilian injuries reported along the border from combat within Burma itself, it remained to be seen how the previous administration's proposal of humanitarian corridor could pave the way towards concrete peace talks. Thailand had actually a coup itself a decade ago and faced some setbacks as well, since the US at that time actually has cut off some of the military aids to Thailand. So it was kind of expected as well to help with the process, but it's still going on, and then referred to also in the ASEAN context and in the ASEAN leaders meeting. Secondly, how expanding partnerships in the Indian Ocean region is crucial to maritime security management. So Thailand has been quite enthusiastic about pursuing connectivity in the Indian Ocean and employed the Indian Ocean Rim Association, or the IORA, more actively in post-COVID-19 economic recovery efforts. And I also heard Pooja mention about BIMSTEC. So Thailand actually shared BIMSTEC from 2022 to 2024, and it had actually emphasized a lot on the prosperous, resilient and open BIMSTEC with the BCG economy in that regard. So Thailand realized that the Indian Ocean actually has high economic potential, which could be linked to Thailand's own southern seaboard economic development, for example. And this venue could also be quite useful to technological exchanges and common risk management, such as climate security. Last but not least, how regional prosperity could be a driver towards sustainable development in the area. So Thailand recently joined BRICS Plus, for example, and IPEF, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, reiterating Thailand's intention to drive regional economic prosperity while trying to avoid being seen as siding with the great powers still. Thailand strives to be competitive, visible, and impactful under its renewed proactive economic diplomacy. So actually, the current administration kind of shared the vision from the previous administration, since the prime minister is from the same party. So we expect that continuity in the proactive economic diplomacy. As the 2023 to 2025 chair of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, or the IONS, Thailand emphasized a lot on the blue economy and sustainable development for all IONS members. So in realizing the shared goals, visions of a free and open Indo-Pacific and sustainable ocean governance, I would say there's certainly high compatibility between Thai Indian Ocean interests and US Indo-Pacific strategy, and of course with like other peers in the areas as well. As well as you say, reasonable commitments from the parties. In conclusion, comprehensive enhancement of maritime security to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific requires Thailand to play a more visible role, not only in building connectivity and prosperity as it tried to give importance to, but also, I would argue, on the political and humanitarian fronts as well.
Kasira, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to come back to it. You are the first person to mention 3 of the prominent multilateral institutions and Thailand's role in chairing BIMSTEC, IONS, and IORA. So I hope we can come back to that, because that was one of my general questions for all of you, was about the role of these various multilateral efforts in the region and how they do or do not complement, supplement each other, and whether any kind of tweaks in it. I'm presaging what I was going to ask you, but it gives you some time to think, because I think input from all of you would help on that. Let us now turn to our colleague from Indonesia, Dr. Gilang Kembara, who is a research fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Dr. Kembara, please.
Thank you very much, Satu. And my appreciation goes to Nilanthi and everyone at East West Center for having me this evening here from Singapore. I'm very honored to share with all the esteemed colleagues and panelists here to be a part of the author on East West Center Bulletin regarding the Indian Ocean. And for this evening, for this event, I'll try to uh, put forward some of the arguments on what Indonesia's main maritime security interests are, especially in the Indian Ocean, and how it connects to the overall US Indo-Pacific strategy writ large. I'm going to bring 3 points just to make things very brief as well. Two of those points are related towards how Indonesia sees its interest in the Indian Ocean. And the last point would be how Indonesia tries to connect it all with the US Indo-Pacific strategy. And these 3 points would be anchored by Indonesia's foreign policy dogma of the free and active policy, bebas dan aktif, and also the new president, President Prabowo's prevalence of having zero enemy and 1,000 friends, a mantra that has always been espoused by many of Indonesia's former presidents, and now is being rekindled again by the current administration. So the first point in regarding with the Indian Ocean, Indonesia has looked into the western part of its maritime border as a lifeline of connectivity, not only for its own unilateral interests, but also to the larger regional interests, particularly to that of ASEAN. So it does strive to play an active role through itself and also through ASEAN by connecting with the various multilateral agencies that are present in the Indian Ocean, namely the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and of course, BIMSTEC as well. This is not only regarding economic connectivity, but would also refer to a number of very low-hanging security cooperation, such as, for example, issues regarding transnational crimes or IU fishing, and other perhaps political connection that would allow Indonesia to have better relations with a myriad of states within the Indian Ocean, from South Asia all the way down to the eastern coast of Africa. And by this sense, Indonesia started by being the chairman of IORA somewhere to lead IORA in the beginning of the Jokowi administration. And then following that, an Indonesian diplomat played a part as the Secretary General of IORA, coming in from the latest 2010s until quite recently. And that showcased a very strong tendency of Indonesia to try to connect with IORA and as well with BIMSTEC, although it's quite slow, but there have been discussions with various BIMSTEC member states regarding how Indonesia can try to make better roles and also play a better relations with many other BIMSTEC parties. My second point related to the Indian Ocean as well is how Indonesia tries to leverage on some of the bilateral relations with some of the major parties and also actors in the Indian Ocean littoral states, but namely with India. Indonesia realizes that its connection with India in espousing and enlarging its footprint, Indonesia's footprint in the Indian Ocean is a key component. There have been a lot of discussions, both economic and security, with India, between Indonesia and India. India realizes that the Straits of Malacca is the gateway from the Indian Ocean into the Pacific Ocean, and it goes through a number of certainly sensitive maritime security corridors, and it strives to play a great part as well in assisting Indonesia in maintaining or having a greater security development between the two actors, both in the Indian Ocean and also how it connects to the larger Pacific area. And my final point is how Indonesia tries to link up with the United States, particularly as Indonesia looks to the United States as its main security partner. I've written and I've alluded in my in my article on how there have been strong security partnership in the form of joint military exercises and also defense relations with the United States. But there are avenues for which both countries can strive even further. And one of them, for example, in having a greater bilateral naval engagement that Indonesia seemed to lack with Washington, but Washington seemed to have with any other Southeast Asian countries as well. So I think there are avenues there for Indonesia to expand its cooperation with the United States in the Indian Ocean. And I think we can explore that more following the discussion. And with that, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Kembara, thank you so much. Really appreciated those points. And we'll come back to you. I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit on the new President Prabowo's very interesting phone call with our president-elect and next stages in the evolution of U.S.-Indonesia partnership, not only in Southeast Asia, but as you say, in terms of larger, wider maritime space and what that might look like. We do now have Dr. Ryan Adeline online, and thank you so much for your patience and good efforts to join us, Dr. Adeline. Please, may I invite you to make your remarks?
Well, good evening from Seychelles. I hope you can hear me. Okay,
Very
great.
well, thank you.
So a very good evening from the Seychelles. I want to thank you all again for your patience as well as I was resolving these technical issues. And a special thank you to Nilanthi and her team. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being part of this project and for being with you tonight. So in my article, well, tonight I will break down 4 main points. The first one is the strategic location of the Seychelles, particularly for the US. The second one, I'll be looking at the public opinion in regards to foreign policy decisions in Seychelles, regional and multilateral cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, and lastly, the US and Seychelles bilateral and military cooperation. Now, Seychelles gained independence in 1976. And since then, it has always been a key and strategic geographical location in the Indian Ocean region, specifically the northern western Indian Ocean region. And during the Cold War, despite the small size of Seychelles, was a very there was this sort of tug of war between the USSR and the US in the use of Seychelles strategically in terms of gathering information, intelligence, etc. The US Air Force Satellite Control Network operated a tracking station on Mahe, which is the main island of Seychelles, which opened in 1963. And this tracking station was one of 9 global tracking stations assisted by the National Aeronautics Space Administration shuttle operations. So this was very key for the US Seychelles with the satellite tracking station up until the mid-90s when it was closed. However, Seychelles continued to remain on the map for the US. The bilateral relations between the two countries was strengthened despite the fact that the US embassy moved its diplomatic operations and oversight to Mauritius. Last year, the US reopened its embassy, so the US now has a resident embassy in Seychelles. It is still being administered by a chargé d'affaires, but we understand that a new resident US ambassador should be accredited fairly soon. I imagine at the end of this year or early next year. So the reopening of a US embassy in Seychelles really signifies an important step in the consolidation of ties and cooperation between Victoria and Washington, D.C. Since its birth, as an independent country, Seychelles has always positioned itself as a non-aligned country. And in 2024, it continues to do so, despite pressures from China and other great powers in the region, such as India, the European Union as well, and the Russian Federation. And Seychelles has always had to navigate its way between these great power rivalries in the region. Now, Seychelles is obviously a very small country with only 100,000 people. However, the Seychellois, the citizens of Seychelles, remain very cautious and watchful of the involvement of the country in multilateral security-related organizations. And the population were very much caught by surprise when Defense Lloyd Austin III announced that Seychelles would be part of Operation Prosperity Guardian in December 2023, following the attack of Houthi rebels on commercial ships in the Red Sea. And this was met with public backlash from the population and from certain local politicians. There has always been this this disdain, if I may say, of our island being involved in greater conflicts. There's always this fear, I would also add, that Seychelles should not be involved in great power rivalries. And this debate was taken from the public sphere into the National Assembly. And the Vice President of Seychelles informed the National Assembly that Seychelles was only to provide intelligence and not any personnel or vessels in this in the Operation Prosperity Guardian as a member of the Combined Maritime Forces. So again, not only in terms of our foreign policy, but also in terms of public opinion, Seychelles has always felt in our core that we should remain unaligned as a small island nation, and in our overall relationship with all countries. With regards to regional and multilateral cooperation, Seychelles spearheaded back in 2009 the Contact Group on Piracy off the coast of Somalia, recently been renamed the Contact Group on Illicit Maritime Activities, CGIMA. And Seychelles took the chair of the CGIMA in September this year, which with the new change of name also comes with a larger mandate to tackle maritime issues such as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, drug and human trafficking in our region, within our EEZ and within the Indian Ocean region. Seychelles is also a key partner in regional working groups such as the Indian Ocean Commission, the IORA, which was also mentioned by previous colleagues, and also in partnership with the UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And this is just to name a few. Seychelles has been very active also with various military exercises, with the 14th edition of the exercise Cutlass Express this year. And this is, which was sponsored by the US Africa Command and led by the US Naval Forces Africa. And Seychelles is participated in these exercises along with other African countries and island nations in the region. And with all this being said, it's also interesting that Seychelles revises its foreign policy strategy to align itself with its national interest. This also sort of surprised us when the government announced that it would withdraw from the Eastern African Standby Force due to financial constraints. So this is something that we are looking at very closely to see how Seychelles will be involved in the region with bilaterally, but also multilaterally in tackling maritime security in the region. And I must say that the United States and Seychelles have very strong bilateral cooperation in the in maritime security, maritime operation and exercises, as I mentioned. The Seychelles Defense Force, so Seychelles doesn't have an army, but it does have a Seychelles Defense Force as a small nation. And we rely heavily on cooperation with various countries to bolster our capacity, training, and to continue to engage with regional partners to tackle illicit activities. With all of this, it's still unclear as to what where Seychelles fits in the US Indo-Pacific free and open strategy. There we have excellent bilateral cooperation, but where do we fit? Where do we go from here? And that has remained unclear over the past few years up until now. It is certain that Seychelles definitely needs to continue to share intelligence and to strengthen its cooperation with the US and other allies in the region. But Seychelles will remain unaligned moving forward, and will continue to, and it continues to strengthen its bilateral ties with all actors in the region. Those who are closer to us, such as India, and those who are further afield, such as the US and China, Japan, and the Russian Federation. So I think this is it pretty much in a nutshell, summing up my article. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Adeline. Really wonderful to have you join us, and thank you for your overview of the article. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you with questions and having some further input from you as we go through the program. Our final speaker, who was a participant and a contributor to this series of analyses in the Asia Pacific Bulletin series, is Dr. Athaulla Rasheed, who is currently a PhD scholar at the Australian National University. Welcome, Dr. Rasheed, and welcome your comments at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Sathu. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank East-West Center for giving me this opportunity first. And it is great to be part of this conversation and also contribute to this current editorial on Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific strategy, focusing on the US strategy. And of course, a special thanks to Nilanthi. It was a great honor to be part of a team contributing to such an edition. I think it's really interesting. First of all, let me provide a context for Maldives because I wrote about Maldives in this context. So Maldives in the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific. As we all know, Maldives is one of the small states in the Indian Ocean and primarily sees the security of the Indian Ocean as a key aspect of its own security or national security. Nationally and domestically, the island nation has been facing multifaceted challenges, including climate threats, sea level rise, global economic shocks, and health crisis. For example, in 2004, the tsunami hit and destroyed most of its infrastructure. A country that depends on tourism needs to be protected, and its infrastructure needs to be protected, which focuses on an ocean-based approach to security. The COVID-19 global pandemic hit the economy again and the society. The global markets and health system also froze. This was a major concern. The country is heavily dependent on the global markets and foreign aid programs. And this dependency has been shaped by national interests to create a climate resilient, economically sustainable, and politically stable economy. Different governments have approached national priorities differently. I note that amid these challenges, Maldives' foreign policy has been stable and primarily focused on regional security interests, and its partnership with India, notably, and like-minded actors. These are the key drivers of Maldives' strategy on the Indo-Pacific as well. So my paper basically highlighted Maldives' strategy on the Indo-Pacific in the context of how it has navigated national interests in the regional security and strategic architecture formed by the United States and its Indo-Pacific partners, including India. So the first thing to note is that when it comes to the security of the nation and region, respecting rules-based order and cooperating with regional actors and neighbors, starting with India, has been the policy priority of Maldives. Cooperating with the US as India's Indo-Pacific partner has given Maldives, also as a small state, the opportunity to contribute to the US-led activities in the Indian Ocean. This contributes to the broader Indo-Pacific strategy as well. So since I'm not going to read the whole paper here, I'll just highlight the key findings that I thought would be important. Maldives remains an important actor in the region, and its development cooperation respects the Indo-Pacific security architecture. Maldives cooperation with the US and like-minded partners is also shaped by the island nation's engagement with India and Indian Ocean security. 3, military-to-military cooperation between the US and Maldives could play an important role in navigating mutual interests in promoting the Indo-Pacific strategy in the Indian Ocean region. So I think I will stop here, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Rasheed, thank you very much indeed. Really brings us to the end of a terrific set of summaries of your papers. And I would say to all the participants online and those of you who will watch this later in recorded format, because it may be the middle of the night or whatever the case might be, please do look at the full series of analyses that Nilanthi Samarnayake has edited, because I think it's a really superb collection that really brings together various countries across the region. often the case tends to look at either the Western Indian Ocean or just the South Asian part of the Indian Ocean or the Eastern Indian Ocean. But this really brings it together, and there are a number of lines I'd like to pursue. Now, we are just 30 minutes approximately away from the close of the session, and the run of show is for myself and Nilanthi to moderate a Q&A. I also see that questions are being placed in the Q&A, and I want to encourage folks to do deposit comments or questions either to the whole panel or to a particular panelist, and we can come to those. But Nilanthi, unless you want to get started, I have a couple of questions I'd like to pose to the whole team, including you, Nilanthi, to start. And I'm going to pick, I could pick several. I have several written down here, but I want to pick two just to start. The first is, all of you have spoken in one way or another about the developmental challenges, the economic issues, the non-traditional issues that face your countries as it applies to the Indian Ocean. Now, I want to ask you sort of bluntly, is a strategy needed for the Indian Ocean from the United States? Is it conceivable that the Indian Ocean countries themselves would come up with a strategy for the Indian Ocean similar or along the lines of an ASEAN Indo-Pacific outlook? Could there be a Indian Ocean states, Indian Ocean outlook strategy? I'd just like to ask you whether you think a separate strategy for the Indian Ocean would be beneficial or useful to your countries, or would it be something that would be incorporated or encompassed or embedded in this larger Indo-Pacific strategy? And the second question I have for the panel is, to what extent, since part of this issue is to discuss the relations with the US, the great thing about this convening of papers and presentations is its ability to capture the whole, not every state in the Indian Ocean, but many states in the Indian Ocean, from west to east. The US military structure is, it splits this up, AFRICOM and CENTCOM and of course, Indo-PACOM. How much of that would you think needs to be changed? Would it be better for the United States to have a different command structure to deal with the issues of the Indian Ocean? Or can they be dealt with through some of the multilateral organizations that you mentioned? So let me leave those two questions. Nilanthi, over to you for any other thoughts, comments at this stage, but wanted to just put a couple things on the table to inspire some further input from our guests.
Thank you, Satu. I think that's such a great question about whether a strategy on the Indian Ocean is needed for the US. It gets to the heart of a lot of this discussion. So I really want to hear from all of our colleagues online what their thoughts are. Should there be a separate strategy on the Indian Ocean? Why don't we go in reverse order of the speakers? So Dr. Rasheed, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think those are very interesting questions and are that spot on. I think this is where we would be focusing on if we want to continue with this conversation about Indo-Pacific and also then focusing on specific states. Like Maldives comes from the Indian Ocean and plays an important role in contributing to the security of the Indian Ocean, which is, broadly speaking, very much dependent on India and India's role and its cooperation with Indian Ocean states, because this is not only a hypothetical thing, it's a very long practice kind of system that has been established since end of Cold War. I mean, so there are certain principles and cultures and customs that actually kind of fit to this Indian Ocean space. But then when we talk about Indo-Pacific, I think both are important. But US, again, coming up with an Indian Ocean separate strategy would, in my thinking, add more complications to find practical solutions to what we are doing right now. Rather, I would see this as a collaborative approach, okay? Bilateral and multilateral cooperation that has been happening between the regions can continue as the dialogue process continues on the security matters, but then try not to add more organizations or more structures while we are trying to also, while most of the small states struggling to place themselves in those existing security structures or architectures. So in a way, I think the coordination between US and Indian Ocean states adds value to the Indo-Pacific strategy. And that means it is actually complementary, but not US's Indian Ocean. I think US's Indian Ocean strategy is most likely the way in which they engage with the Indian Ocean states to promote and support and enhance the Indo-Pacific strategy. So yeah, that's my say for now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Nilanthi. I was waiting for you. Beg your pardon. Could we invite Ryan? I think you went just before Dr. Rasheed, so maybe you'd like to comment on that question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Satu. Yes, I don't really have much to add to what was previously said. I very much agree with that. I think for Seychelles, one of the challenges of working with state actors in the region, in Eastern Africa and the islands, is sometimes there's lack of this political will from certain states within the current structure to tackle maritime security issues. So again, is there a political will now to go further with this, to take it to the next level, so to speak? So I think for me personally, looking at Seychelles, this is probably a sticking point, I would say. But as it was previously said, I think there is still quite a lot of scope within the current structure. A lot can still be done, and for a lot of these regional cooperation is still quite new, still in its infancy, still building up capacity. So I think there is still room to maneuver and to engage with our partners in the region within the current structure.
Thank you. Mr. Kembara.
Thanks for the question, Satu. And for the first one, regarding the strategy on both the US and whether Indian Ocean states want to establish one, I suppose I'd like to answer in a way that what would anchor these strategies, especially by the United States itself? We here in Southeast Asia, or at least from my perspective, we kind of understand that the US Indo-Pacific strategy, despite it not being written outrightly, I mean, we perceive it as a way to try to curtail China in its attempt to, revise the whole international world order. So I mean, we can pierce the veil really well to see where it lies. Where the anchor lies. But once you start to split it up into specifically in the Indian Ocean per se, we have to understand, we want to understand then what would the anchor would be, where the United States would try to link up that strategy towards. Is there another attempt to try to curtail another power, or is it another attempt perhaps to maybe enlarge the United States presence there, but through what particular channel to funnel itself? For the Indian Ocean states itself, coming from my country in Indonesia, we are quite allergic to the term strategy. Strategy for us means that we are constraint of what sort of like or what sort of movements that we can afford ourselves to. We strive for flexibility rather than tying our legs for the foreseeable, 5, 10, or 50 years in the come. So I wouldn't think that's something that for my country is something that they want to support. And lastly, regarding if there's any separate command structure, I wouldn't think so, in a sense that if there would be another split for the Indo-PACOM to another two command structure, I can't imagine the added degree of infighting regarding budget. That, oh, I deserve more, slice of the cake. Oh no, they too deserve more slice of the cake. I suppose right now there's already a big tussle on who deserves it better. I'm not gonna say I don't have any favoritism, but I suppose yeah, I can see that this is going to be a very difficult fight if there's a new agency in town. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kembara. Let's turn to Dr. Kasira.
Thank you. Dr. Kembara has already mentioned it, but like you can already see from the ASEAN version, it has quite a different tone from the US Indo-Pacific Strategy though, and it used the word vision instead of strategy. So I'm not sure if when we have Trump 2.0 as well, the tendency might be that the US might want to focus on the key partners they already have in the Quad, for example, and some other partners might feel a little bit skeptic or a bit doubtful about more expectations coming from them in this regard. So, I mean, on the other hand, it could be useful in the way that we're facing, we're moving from traditional security solely to the area of NTS or non-traditional security issues anyway, right? So it would be useful in kind of highlighting some of the priorities or threats from maritime domain that also affected largely other, Indian Ocean partners as well, even though they are not geographically here, but they have interest in the Indian Ocean. So that could be some added value. But as I said, I'm not sure if even though you use other words other than strategy, it would kind of be facilitating to some of the corporations. So we need to ask what would be the use or added value of having this specific vision or strategy that the Indian Ocean countries would be coming up. But if it's really open from bottom-up approach, really concern the interest, also taking up the interest from the population kind of human-centric way as well, not only from the state perspective, I would say it could be useful. So it depends. I don't have definite answer right now.
Oh, thank you very much for your input. I hadn't thought of calling it something else than strategy, but that's a very American mindset. I kept thinking, should we have an Indian Ocean strategy? But I can quite see your point that maybe it could be called the Indian Ocean Outlook or the Indian Ocean Vision statement. But thank you, appreciate your comments. I do want to give Dr. Pooja and Dr. Chulanee a chance if they have any thoughts on this. Otherwise, I am conscious of the time and turning to some of the questions in the Q&A section of our program. So please, Dr. Pooja, Dr. Bhatt, and then Dr. Attanayake, please. Yeah, please, Dr. Attanayake, you have your hand up.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I didn't see both. Okay, well, since I called out Dr. Attanayake first, why don't you go? And Pooja, would you bear with us and go next? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sato. So with regard to your first question, it's very interesting, and it's, I think, a very important question as well, whether US should have a different strategy for Indian Ocean. As of now, Indo-Pacific strategy itself is huge. And I agree with Dr. Kembara's point on even though it's not written, it's basically is about, to a certain extent, curtailing China's influence. So with that in mind, I would like to see more acknowledgement on the US part about the difference between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and also acknowledgement on the different aspects or different sub-regions within the Indian Ocean region, because the challenges are different because of that. The reason why I'm saying is that China's behavior in particular is very different in each part of this world. So it's not the same in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. So acknowledging that difference will make a change in how US will be able to address and cooperate with the small countries in the Indian Ocean region, in different parts, different sub-regions within the Indian Ocean region. And it's also important to understand India's role in the Indian region, Indian Ocean region as well, and how other states perceive the Indian Ocean, India within this region. Because China's influence is not the same in the central Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. India's role is not the same in these two regions. So acknowledging that will give a better understanding of the concerns. Also, from the point of view of small states in particular, I would suggest that it's important to know what are the priorities for small states, whether it is the geopolitical tension or the climate change. And depending on this understanding, it would help in United States to have a more comprehensive strategy to cooperate with these countries. Having a blanket approach to the entire Indo-Pacific region perhaps not work in the long run.
Thank you, Dr. Attanayake. Pooja, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. So I'm aware that we have less time, so I'll quickly take a blunt view on your blunt question that you asked, that whether US needs an Indo-Pacific Indian Ocean strategy. I think I will echo with most of the speakers here, and I would say maybe not, because we are struggling with IORA, and the problem with the IORA, and which I think others have also mentioned, is the problem is resources. Despite being 23 countries, I think the budget of IORA is even less than the Indian Ocean Commission when it comes to funding certain programs. So while IORA wants to be the regional institution, it might not be happy to take out extra regional partners in terms of your members, but it would be better if the countries like US and like-minded partners can come together, cooperating with IORA countries in terms of training, resources, and other ways. I don't know how much it is feasible to do it while you're not a full member, but I think that's the only way of avoiding this entire aversion of South Asian and Southeast Asian countries to take sides and avoid maintain their strategic autonomy. So I think to just navigate all these problems, it's better to not have a full-fledged Indian Ocean strategy, but help them in other ways how countries would like it to be. And to the second question that you asked, that whether we need an Indo-PACOM and these new organization, basically, I don't think so. Again, we need it because all these Indo-PACOM and CENTCOM basically are very geographically neat and cut. Instead of doing that, again, what US can do is there are already existing organizations like CMF, Combined Maritime Forces, and others, where US can combine hands with those existing forces to provide whatever needed resources and trainings might be, instead of reinventing the wheel. And that would be my answer. Thank you.
Well, Pooja, thanks so much. I sense a kind of nascent consensus around my question, because as I was reading your papers and listening to your comments, it all boiled down to me, at least for the US part of it, do we need to do something different? And if so, what is it? And how would it be framed and acceptable to the countries of the region in a way that would provide the basis for further cooperation with the countries of the region? And hence my question, explaining why I kind of came to this as a rather blunt question. I had a couple of other blunt ones, but I'm very conscious we have some wonderful folks online, and they have kindly stayed with us and joined us and have some comments and questions. So I'll try to go through them, and if they're for a particular person, I'll point that out. So Commander Retired Roshan who's currently doing a PhD. And the question is to Dr. Chulanee. Mentioned you. Have you found any literature in the area of arms smuggling? That seems to be a method, seems to be related to your PhD, Commander. And my second question is about maritime disaster management. Do you think Sri Lanka has enough capabilities to counter maritime disasters, such as the MV Express Pearl, in the future? I know, Dr. Attanayake, you mentioned a lot about capabilities and resources of the Sri Lankan forces, and I wondered if you could maybe comment a bit on that. And I would also invite Nilanthi if she wants to add to that, because I know you've done so much work on Sri Lanka's maritime role, and obviously you would have things to say too. But shall we start with Dr. Attanayake on this question?
Yeah, thank you, Commander Roshan, for the question. With regard to your first one, probably for your PhD, and congratulations on pursuing one. I did not find any academic literature, a lot of academic literature, but there are some gray literature. For instance, the Global Organized Crime Index has information about Sri Lanka's arms smuggling. The recent report I found, I think, in 2021. And then in 2016, ASPI, Australia Strategic Policy Institute, did a report on transnational crimes in Sri Lanka, and they also have some information. There are a lot of literature on Sri Lanka and arms smuggling related crimes during the war period, but post 2009, there's not much. So you will have to rely on grey literature and reports. With regard to the second question, I think in my article also I mentioned this, that Sri Lanka does not have enough capability when it comes to responding to disaster management, as we saw during the MV Express Pearl disaster. So because of that reason, I suggest that Sri Lanka perhaps need more training and cooperation and engagement with the United States and also other like-minded partners in developing these capabilities. Despite we are a small country, but we have ocean that to monitor that is 7 the size of our land mass. So it's important that we build our capabilities. So I mentioned this in detail in the paper as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nilanthi, any thoughts, please?
Sure. Yes, I agree with Dr. Chulanee as well that Sri Lanka could benefit from more capabilities to address maritime disasters, maritime pollution, like the Express Pearl incident that took place. From a U.S. perspective, I think the U.S. has been an important partner to Sri Lanka on maritime security cooperation. For example, the transfer of 3 U.S. Coast Guard cutters, retired cutters, that's been quite useful to Sri Lanka. And most recently this year, the U.S. now has also transferred an aircraft to the Sri Lanka Air Force. So that's also an exciting development in terms of longstanding U.S.-Sri Lanka cooperation. And I see I have one question here in the Q&A. I'll just take that now. That's from Admiral Pereira about underwater domain awareness. This is definitely an issue that the U.S. is paying increased attention to, particularly with India. We've seen this term underwater domain awareness. This is a term that India uses, and the U.S. I think has mirrored the use of that term. A lot of times the U.S. will talk about undersea cooperation, but it's mentioned underwater domain awareness. So I see that as really mirroring concerns that it hears from India, and it's emphasized this type of cooperation in the undersea domain. And also with regard to the Quad, there's the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness cooperation that's taking place. So IPMDA, I think, is another way of trying to get at increased maritime domain awareness, particularly to address non-traditional security challenges like illegal fishing.
Nilanthi, just to follow up on that, please help me to understand. I've lost the dot on this, and maybe you're more current. there used to be the Extension and Expansion of Maritime Security Initiative, MSI, to some of the South Asian Indian Ocean states, and indeed Indian Ocean states as well. Is that been supplanted or replaced now by IPMEDA, or this Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness under the Quad? Or are those two parallel tracks? I've kind of lost the financing and capabilities dot on the two initiatives.
That's a great question. My understanding is these are separate initiatives where there were actually pots of money assigned to the Indo-Pacific Maritime Security Initiative, or MSI. But with IPMDA, this is really a Quad-led initiative as opposed to a US national initiative.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. We have our colleague Peshan Gunaratne, who has 3 questions here, but I'm going to take the liberty, since we have just 8 minutes, to summarize. They're all based around the issue of Sri Lanka. And so, you know, both Nilanthi and Dr. Chulanee, but anyone else wants to weigh on this as it applies to your country, for example, because I do think some of the issues raised are relevant. For example, do you think you can maintain a non-aligned policy? The question is specifically aimed at Sri Lanka here. But I would ask, you know, 1,000 friends, no enemies, strategic equilibrium, Dr. Kembara, Indonesia is free and active in the constitution. So, you know, this is relevant to a number of countries. I mean, after all, even India proclaims a non-aligned or a, you know, omnidirectional policy. I'm not sure what the current word is in India, but so I welcome this also from the vantage point of other issues. And Mr. or Ms. Gunaratne also asks, you know, what's the role of India here? Because India is a big player. And that was my other blunt question, which I didn't ask, but I'll just kind of drop it in here is, you know, US strategy essentially calls for India to be a certainly not dominant actor, but a preeminent actor in the Indian Ocean. I mean, the term in the past has been used as net security provider. Well, how do all of these countries that you represent or come from, you don't represent, but you know, the ones you specialize on, your expertise, why don't we start this time? Can we start with Mr. Adeline and then go through and then come up, end with Sri Lanka, since the question was initially, I've taken the liberty of expanding it to all the panel. How about Seychelles in terms of avoiding strategic competition and keeping, as you mentioned, you know, your freedom of action and maneuver?
Yes, thank you for the question. Personally, I don't see that changing. I think Seychelles has used this to our advantage. You know, we have excellent cooperation with India as well since our independence. India also has been a key partner in the development of our military, but also and you have other state actors such as France as well and the UK in patrolling our EEZ. Our EEZ is huge. We do not have the capacity to do this on our own. So we, as I said in the article, we navigate it carefully, but we also use it to our advantage. And we do not see this, we do not wish to change this at the moment. Yeah, so was there another question? I don't know if I've answered.
No, that's very useful. I was kind of riffing on the Sri Lanka question about, you know, managing its non-aligned policy in a contested region, and I appreciate Seychelles' input. Maybe Maldives, Dr. Rasheed, any thoughts on this before we turn to Indonesia and Sri Lanka and India and Thailand, of course? Dr. Rasheed?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Do you want me to say something on non-alignment or India's role, or?
Yeah, both. I mean, can Maldives maintain this balance, and how does it navigate strategic competition as well as the kind of, shall we say, and all of
yeah.
India physically?
And now, just I'll try to keep it very short. I don't, from my studying and readings and also working in the Maldives government for a long time in the foreign service and everything, I think following the regional policies and respecting regional order is one of the primary principles of foreign policy in Maldives. And as a small state, then again, we also understand that we depend on foreign partnerships. And India has been the key priority partner, and it has remained due to, even through political changes, that policy hasn't changed. And due to that, I don't see that non-alignment. I mean, that philosophy or maybe the identity and idea came post-war time has changed dramatically in different ways. I mean, the way in which we choose who we align with doesn't mean we do not align with anyone, because we are not. I think that when you look at the past, it's like picking sides of certain like traditional security actors, but now it's gone beyond that. And I think India has an important role in the region, and the way in which my engagement and my interaction with the US military or the US agencies in Maldives shows that US has a high respect for what is already in place as the regional order through India's cooperation with small states or other states in the region. So yes, one is no, not necessarily there is a defined non-aligned principle. And second thing, yes, it is very important that India's role is primary in the Indian Ocean region. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rasheed. Can we have quick responses from our Indonesian and Thai colleagues before turning to Sri Lanka and, of course, India too on this issue?
Sure, Satu. Let me do a very quick response on your question on non-alignment and Indonesia, especially if I try to unpack the zero enemy and 1,000 friends. I see it as a way for Indonesia to try to buy some time, for itself to develop, its own, strategic alignment, strategic position. Now, in this, what we were looking at a multipolar world in the future, I think what Indonesia tries to do is try to be its own polarity, right? It doesn't want to go east, doesn't want to go west. It wants to have its own sort of established polarity. And what it says by having the zero friends, 1,000 enemy, zero enemy, 1,000 friends is the way. It's a way of Indonesia to say to the United States, to China, and to the other countries, don't go to war now, or don't fight each other now, maybe fight each other in 30 years time, maybe fight each other in 50 years time. But for now, allow us to expand our own capability so that by the time 50 years down the road, when you guys go to war, we're able to defend ourselves and steer clear of all the conflicts. So I think that's my very brief outlook for now. Thanks.
Well, I'm gonna next time I see you, Mr. Kembara, we're gonna talk about that more and how Indonesia plans to get there. Dr. Kasira, a thought from Thailand.
Yes, actually, this kind of like emphasis on neutrality or like bamboo diplomacy, it goes wherever like things benefit us, right? It's actually questioned a lot recently that it might hurt Thailand in the long run, but Thailand's still like trying to find it a kind of principled foreign policy. But now it focuses a lot more on improving like domestic economic situations, for example, and well-being. So I would say it's a kind of practical neutrality, but the word it used actually non-conflict. So it would maintain non-conflict with all other countries in the world, and then try to increase opportunities for Thailand. It's like it actually like to have like many options in their foreign policy repertoire. That's all. So you can see like if they join like a multilateral groups or any kind of regional groupings, right, would be really careful to also join like the other one, to just see that, okay, but we're friends with both sides maybe, and then we try to increase our own venues.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kasira. I want to give, before turning to Sri Lanka to close out this session, and that would give Nilanthi also the final word. Pooja, quick thought about the comments you've heard and the issue?
Yes. So I think when we talk about non-alignment, and now India has moved towards multi-alignment, that's the term now we use along with strategic autonomy. I think the idea is the moment we talk about choosing sides or maybe talking about alignment, it's about, great power rivalry. And when you shift the conversations to regional problems and dialogues, I think we are not willing to pick any sides because regional problems are common to all. And I think it's multi-aligned policy which works in the favor of the region. And therefore, I think it is important to understand this kind of narrative by the US and other partners that India is trying to, build the region based upon common interest and common threats and not divide on the basis of, whatever great power rivalry. And I think if US government starts understanding that way and start cooperating with India and, understanding the common vision for the region, I think it would be beneficial to cooperate. That would be my ending point.
Thank you, Pooja. Thanks so much. Let's turn to Dr. Chulanee, and then to close out our session, our guest editor, our adjunct fellow, and the convener of this set of analyses and presentations, close with Dr. Attanayake. Please, Chulanee.
Thank you, Dr. Satu, and thank you, Peshan, for a very interesting series of questions. Completely, I think the conversation completely dominated Sri Lanka. With regard to whether Sri Lanka will have to reconsider its non-aligned policy of its relationship with the world, I think it's a conversation that we have been having for some time. But Sri Lanka has successfully navigated the situation using strategic hedging, understanding Sri Lanka's own interest and working with all partners equally. And this is something that we should consider. Now we have a new government in Sri Lanka, and I think they will continue on the same policy moving forward. And about the region, I also believe that Sri Lanka has a lot of lessons to learn from Southeast Asia in terms of managing this strategic rivalry and how to strategically hedge between competing partners to realize their own interest. With regard to the question on role of India, I think I mentioned in my previous comment as well, it's important to understand how small countries perceive India within the region and what role they are comfortable for India to have within the region for United States, rather than looking at small countries through the lens of India, to look at these small countries on their own terms. Because some of the challenges these small countries are facing, possibly because of India's expanding role in the region. So that understanding helps to have a more cooperative and peaceful region, I believe. And I also had a question on IUU fishing from Peshan. If I have a few minutes, I'll quickly respond to that as well.
Really quick, because
yes.
we're already 5 minutes over.
Yes, so I think IUU fishing is a very complicated issue in Sri Lanka, and definitely, if I respond very bluntly, Sri Lanka is definitely at a disadvantage because we are a small country. So it is very important for us to understand how we are going to respond, what are the strategies that we are going to use in order to safeguard our maritime resources, our maritime environment, giving priority to Sri Lanka's fishing community. I actually have a working paper on this. If you are interested, Peshan, you can check it at ISA's NUS website.
Thank you, Chulanee. Nilanthi, will you please close us out? And again, let me, because this will be my final intervention, thank you to the wonderful panelists. Thank you for your papers. Thank you for your comments today. And thank you, Nilanthi, for convening us for this very timely and important discussion. My mind is buzzing with next steps already, Nilanthi, and I'm sure we will sit down before or after the holidays and think about that. So over to you.
Yes, me too, Satu. I have taken copious notes based on everybody's insightful comments. But yes, thank you, Satu, for chairing our discussion today expertly. Thank you to all of the authors for not only your excellent written contributions, which I encourage everyone in the audience to take a look at the East-West Center in Washington's website so you can read all of the author contributions. But thank you also for sharing your comments today and insights. I think this has been really such a not only a fascinating discussion, but also a cutting edge discussion on the Indian Ocean that I have not heard before. So many actionable recommendations as well as different ideas for different approaches and visions of the Indian Ocean. My thanks to Zoe Weaver-Lee for all of her help in organizing the discussion today, and a video will be available for those who would like to watch this session again. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.